The crystalline towers of Elshara stood tall under two moons as Lady Keleth. Moonshadow walked down into the combat arena with her head held high and her silver armor catching the strange light from above, and her bonded dragon, Azuring, followed. Behind her, with his massive wings folded against his body and his scales shimmered blue like precious stones. Dipped in starlight, and the elf looked around at all the people watching with eyes that showed she thought very little of them all, lady. Keleth saw the human standing in the center of the fighting ground, and she almost laughed out loud because this creature looked so ordinary and so unremarkable compared to the elves who had ruled the stars for thousands of years, and the human had no pointed ears like the elves, and no magic flowing through her body, and no centuries of fighting experience written in the way she stood, and she wore simple leather armor that had been fixed many times, and carried nothing but a wooden practice. Sword in her hands, the human was named Maya Collins, and she was a lieutenant in something called the Human Defense Corps, and she just stood there holding that wooden sword and waiting without saying anything, and her dark eyes watched every move that Lady Keleth and Azurnwing made, but her face showed nothing at all, lady. Keleth laughed, and the sound was like bells ringing through the arena, and she turned to look at the adjudicator. It was an ancient elf, wearing robes the color of midnight. And she asked him if this was supposed to be some kind of joke, because surely the humans understood that this was a real duel to first blood, and not a game for children to play. Maya spoke quietly, said that the wooden sword was good enough. For what she needed to do this made Lady Keleth laugh even harder, because she thought it was the funniest thing she had heard in a very long time, and for 3,000 years her people had been the strongest in all the galaxy because they had magic, and they had dragons bonded to them, and no other race could match them in any way, and humans were newcomers who had only just left their home world 200 years ago, and they had no magic and no dragon bonds and no natural gifts, except for being stubborn and always trying new things. Lady Keleth pulled out her moonblade, which was a sword made in the fires of stars and cooled in dragon breath, and the weapon hummed with power and wanted to taste blood. She said that when she was done with this human, the entire human race would learn where they belonged in the order of things in humanity. Would stop trying to expand into space that belonged to the Elvezer made a deep rumbling sound of agreement, and smoke came from his nose, because even a young dragon could destroy buildings with fire, and Azuring had lived for 500 years and seen many wars. Maya shifted how she stood and held the wooden sword loosely at her side, and to Lady Keleth it looked like the human was being careless and leaving herself open to attack, but something about the way Maya stood completely still made the elf pause for just a moment, like when a hunter sees prey that looks strange and unfamiliar. The adjudicator raised his hand and said that Lady Keleth Moonshadow of House Starwind would face Lieutenant Maya Collins of Earth, and the rules were simple, because First Blood would decide who won, and the winner would control the disputed territories called the Outer Reach. And then his hand fell, and he said to begin. Lady Keleth moved with speed that most creatures could not even see, and her blade cut through the air toward Maya's shoulder, because she wanted to wound the human's pride more than her body, but the sword only cut through empty air. Maya had moved impossibly fast, and her wooden blade touched Lady Keleth's wrist with perfect aim, and the elf's fingers stopped working right for just a second, and her grip became weak, and before she could fix this problem, the human's boot swept her legs, and Lady Keleth found herself stumbling backward and trying not to fall. This could not be happening, because no human should be able to move that fast. Azuring roared with anger and jumped forward to protect his bonded partner, but Maya was already rolling under his snapping jaws, and the wooden sword hit the dragon's front leg 2 times right where the joint was weakest, and this was a spot that no one should have known about, but somehow the human knew exactly where to strike, and Azuring bellowed in surprise more than pain, and his leg buckled a little bit. Lady Keleth got her balance back, and her stance became proper again, but now she felt something she had not felt in a very long time, and that feeling was fury mixed with confusion, because she asked how the human dared to do this. Maya's face still showed nothing, and she said that Lady Keleth had chosen this challenge herself, and her arrogance had chosen this fate. For her, the wooden sword did not look like a toy anymore, and in Maya's hands it looked like death waiting to happen, and Lady Keleth realized that something was very wrong, because this fight was not going the way it should go at all. The elf had trained for 3,000 years and fought in countless battles and won every single time, and she had defeated dragon slayers and conquered fortress worlds and earned 17 scars of honor in single combat, and yet this human had lived for maybe 30 years, was matching her move for move. Lady Keleth's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening, because she had fought for 3 millennia and mastered every combat style known to her people and studied under the greatest weapon masters in elven history, and she had never been disarmed even once in all those long years. And yet here she was stumbling and confused. Maya stood ready and waiting with that simple wooden sword, and the human said nothing more, but her eyes never stopped watching, and Lady Keleth suddenly understood that she had made a terrible mistake when she mocked this warrior in her wooden weaponizer. Wings circled around, trying to find an angle to attack from, but he was moving more carefully now, because the dragon had learned that this human was dangerous in ways he did not expect, and the confidence he had felt before was gone and replaced with caution. The crowd watching from above had gone completely silent, because they had expected to see Lady Keleth destroy this human in seconds and prove once again that elves were superior to all other races, but instead they were watching something that should not be possible. Lady Keleth tightened her grip on her moonblade and channeled magic into the weapon, making it glow with power, and she knew she could not treat this human like a simple opponent anymore, because Maya Collins was something different and something dangerous. The elf prepared to attack again, but this time, with all her skill and all her speed and all her 3,000 years of experience, because her pride had been wounded and she would not accept this humiliation, and she would show this human and everyone watching that elves were still the masters of combat. But deep inside, where she did not want to look, Lady Keleth felt a small seed of doubt growing, because for the first time in 3,000 years she was not certain that she would win this fight. Lady Keleth's moonblade blazed with blue fire as she poured her magic into the weapon, and the arena floor cracked under her feet when she launched herself forward, and her movements were so fast that most normal eyes could not follow them. And azure ring circled above, getting ready to dive down in a coordinated attack, because this was a tactic that had won them many victories before. The wooden sword met the moonblade with a sound like thunder. Cracking this should not be possible, because wood could never stand against steel that was forged in starfire. But Maya's weapon not only held strong, but it redirected Lady Keleth's strike with very little effort, and the human's footwork moved her inside. The elf's guard and the wooden blades tip touched Lady Keleth's breastplate right over her heart, but not hard enough to dent the armor. It was a warning. Lady Keleth jumped back, and her mind was working fast, trying to figure out what was happening, because she had been fighting for 3,000 years, and she had defeated warriors who could slay dragons and conquered entire fortress worlds and earned 17 honor scars in single combat, and yet this human, who was barely 30 years old, was matching her in every way. Lady Keleth shouted a command to Azure Wing in the high tongue and told him to use Pattern 7. Dragon understood right away, and he breathed out a wall of blue flame that was not hot enough to kill, because that would break the rules of the duel. But it was meant to block vision and control where the human could move, and through the fire, Lady Keleth would strike from an angle that Maya would not expect. But Maya was not there when Lady Keleth's blade came through the flames. The human had moved through the fire, and her armor was smoking, but she was not hurt, and her wooden sword was already moving, and it struck Lady Keleth's blade near the handle in a precise hit that used the elf's own speed against her, and the moonblade went flying through the air and clattered against the arena wall. Lady Keleth had been disarmed, and in 3,000 years this had never happened to her before. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it, and she asked how this was possible. Maya's answer was almost gentle, but the wooden sword never moved from its position at Lady Keleth's throat, and the human said that Lady Keleth had fought for 3,000 years, and in all that time she had never faced anyone she could not intimidate or overpower, and she had never needed to be efficient, because she could always rely on being stronger or faster or more skilled. Maya explained that humans did not have thousands of years to perfect their skills, because they only lived maybe 80 years, and so they did not try to master everything alone, and instead they shared knowledge and worked together and built on what others before them had learned. And one human might be weak compared to an elf, but humans working together became something much greater. Pterosaur dove down with his massive body falling toward Maya, and his claws were extended, but the human had been watching him from the corner of her eye the entire time when she dropped and rolled and her wooden blade struck the dragon's wing in a precise spot that made a zergwing crash to the ground in a clumsy heap, and he was not hurt, but he was very embarrassed. Lottie Kelith summoned her magic, and chains made of light erupted from her palms to wrap around the human. And this was technically against the spirit of the duel, but pride had taken over where honor should be, and the chains wrapped around Maya, and then they shattered into piece. Small devices on Maya's armor glowed with soft blue light, and the human explained that these were null field generators, and humans could not do magic, so they learned how to stop it instead. And she said that adaptation was the first lesson every human learned, because they either adapted or they died. The elf reached for the knife in her boot, but Maya's wooden sword was already there and disarmed her. Again with a simple twist, and Lady Kelith found herself backing toward the arena wall with all her legendary skill, meaning nothing against this opponent. Lady Kelith said that Maya fought with desperation and had no honor and no artistry and only brutal efficiency. Maya said that humans fought to survive, and then her next strike came faster than thought, and the wooden blade cracked against Lady Kelith's shoulder armor, and the metal bent inward, and wood should not be able to dent enchanted silver, but somehow it did. Human explained that humans did not have magic to protect them, and they did not have dragons to fight their battles, and they only had each other and their cleverness and their absolute refusal to accept extinction. Another strike came, and Lady Kelith barely blocked it with her arm guard, but the impact sent shockwaves through her arm, and her armor was supposed to spread out the force of any hit, but it was not working properly. She could not understand why a wooden sword was doing this. Then Lady Kelith saw it, and there was a very faint shimmer along the wooden blade's edge, like the air was bending, and this was technology far beyond what she expected from humans. Lady Kelith demanded to know what that was. Maya smiled for the first time, and it was a cold smile, and she explained that the edge was something called monomolecular, and it was suspended in a resonance field, and the wood was just a shell hiding a blade that could cut through molecular bonds, and humans called it an equalizer. Maya said that Lady Kelith had mocked human innovation, and that was her second mistake, and her first mistake was assuming that humans would fight fair. Lady Kelith's whole world became focused on just surviving, because Azurwing was still trying to get up and was confused from his fall, and all her weapons were scattered around the arena, and her magic was useless against the null field, and this human warrior was taking apart 3,000 years of elven superiority with a wooden sword and human cleverness. Maya said quietly that Lady Kelith should yield or learn the hard way that underestimating humanity was a fatal mistake. Pride fought against survival inside Lady Kelith's ancient heart, because yielding meant admitting defeat and admitting that everything she believed about elven superiority was wrong. But when she looked into Maya's eyes, she saw absolute certainty, and these were the eyes of someone who had survived against impossible odds too many times to count. Lady Kelith's hand started to move toward the surrender gesture, but centuries of fighting instinct took over rational thought, and she triggered the emergency release on her breastplate, and it exploded outward in a flash of light and force, because this was a last resort tactic meant to stun opponents and create distance. Maya was already moving backward before the flash even reached its peak, and somehow the human had seen this coming too. The elf used the momentary disruption to get close to Azuring, because together they would at least have the advantage of numbers. The wooden sword struck the ground between them. The arena floor erupted with force that was not magic, and Lady Kelith would have sensed magic, but this was something else, and it sent both her and Azuring sliding apart from each other. Maya explained that there were kinetic pulse generators in the sword's handle, and humans had adapted the technology from mining equipment, because humans were very good at turning tools into weapons. Lady Kelith's shoulder armor was hanging in broken pieces, and the silver metal was twisted and ruined, and her legendary protection that had been forged by master craftsmen over many years and enchanted by the greatest mages, was defeated by human engineering that she could not even fully understand. Ezerung got to his feet in fury, replaced his caution, and the dragon's roar shook the arena as he unleashed his full breath weapon, and this was not the controlled flame from before, but a flood of blue. Fire hot enough to melt stone, and the rules did not matter anymore because his bonded partner was in danger. Maya did not run, and she did not even look worried, though. Human raised her left arm, and a shield made of rippling energy appeared in the dragon fire, split around it like water flowing around a rock, and it scorched the arena walls but left Maya completely untouched. Maya said calmly that this was a personal shield generator, and humans had reverse engineered it from elven technology after they captured one of the elven scout ships 15 years ago, and she thanked Lady Kaleth's people for the lesson in defensive systems. Lady Kaleth felt something break inside her chest, and it was not physical, but something deeper, and her worldview and her certainty in elven superiority was shattering as completely as her armor. The elf whispered that Maya had been preparing for this, and all of it, from the duel to the wooden sword to appearing outmatched, was a demonstration. Maya lowered her shield, and for the first time, Lady Keleth saw something in the humans' eyes that was almost like pity, and Maya explained that elven people had been blocking human expansion for 50 years, and they had destroyed human colonies and captured human ships and killed human explorers, and always with the same message that humanity was not ready for the stars. Maya said that yes, this was a demonstration, because the elven government insisted that all territorial disputes be settled through trial by combat, and they assumed humans would send clumsy warriors with basic weapons to face elven champions, and the elves expected humans to lose and be humiliated and learn their place. But instead, Lady Keleth was learning that humans were the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, not because they were stronger or had magic, but because when they were threatened, they did not just fight back, but they innovated and adapted and turned every defeat into a lesson, and every lesson into a weapon. Ezerung lunged again, but he moved slower now, and with hesitation because the dragon had been humbled, and he knew it, and Maya stepped to the side easily, and her wooden blade traced a line across his snout that was not deep enough to draw blood, but enough to mark him with a warning and a promise. Maya continued speaking and said that Lady Keleth's armor was a marvel of elven craftsmanship, and it was enchanted to redistribute kinetic force and woven with spells to resist piercing and slashing, and it probably took a master smith 2 years to create and cost more than a small starship. The wooden sword struck Lady Keleth's remaining chestplate shattered into pieces, and not just cracked or dented, but completely shattered, and fragments of silver metal scattered across the arena floor like fallen stars. Maya said softly that the problem with magic was that it had rules and patterns and frequencies that could be measured and disrupted, in humans spent 20 years analyzing, captured elven equipment, and they learned something fascinating, which was that all elven enchantments operated on similar resonant frequencies, and they were all vulnerable to the same harmonic disruption. She tapped her wooden sword against Lady Keleth's remaining shoulder armor, and the metal crumbled like rust. Maya explained that this sword was not just a blade, but a frequency weapon specifically calibrated to shatter elven military-grade enchantments, and every straight had been broadcasting a harmonic pulse that degraded the armor's magical structure, and Lady Keleth's protection had been failing for the last 5 minutes. But she just did not realize it until Lady Keleth looked down at herself, and her legendary armor that was the pride of House Starwind hung in ruins, and she wore a little more than scraps of metal and torn padding, and 3,000 years of elven magical superiority had been reduced to rubble by human ingenuity and a wooden sword. Lady Keleth asked how this was possible, and the question came out as barely a whisper, and she wanted to know how humans achieved this in mere centuries when elves had millennia to perfect their arts. Maya's expression became slightly softer, and she said that humans had to achieve it because they did not have the luxury of millennia, and when someone is mortal and their life is measured in decades instead of centuries, they either innovate rapidly or they Maya explained that humanity's greatest strength was never magic or physical superiority, but that humans never ever gave up, and they had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars and near extinction events and hostile first contacts, and each time they emerged stronger, and each time they learned, and each time they refused to accept that they were beaten, the wooden sword came to rest against the elf's throat one final time. Maya's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire silent arena, and she said that when Lady Kelith mocked the wooden sword and laughed at human audacity, she was not just insulting Maya, but she was insulting every human who ever refused to stay down, and every innovator who turned impossibility into reality, and every survivor who looked at certain death and said, "Not today." The adjudicator stepped forward, and his ancient face showed no emotion, and he asked if Lady Kelith. Moonshadow yielded. Lady Kelith looked at Azurewing, and her dragon met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw the same reluctant understanding that they had lost, not just the duel, but the comfortable certainty that had defined their entire civilization. Lady Kelith said that she yielded, and each word felt like swallowing broken glass, and she said that the Outer Reach territories belonged to humanity now, and humanity had earned its place among the stars. Maya lowered her weapon and extended her hand, and it was not done in mockery, but in genuine respect. And she said that was all humans ever wanted, which was not to conquer elves or destroy them, but just to be recognized as equals and to have a chance to prove themselves. Lady Kelith stared at the offered hand for a long moment, and then slowly and with great difficulty she reached out and grasped it, and the elf's grip was weak from exhaustion and humiliation. But the human's grip was firm and strong, but not crushing. As they shook hands, Lady Kelith understood with perfect clarity that this duel was not an ending, but a beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same. The crowd that had been silent began to react, and there were gasps and murmurs and shocked exclamations, because no one had expected to see Lady Kelith Moonshadow defeated, and certainly not by a human with a wooden sword. Some of the elven observers looked angry, and some looked confused, and some looked thoughtful, as if they were reconsidering everything they believed about humanity and their place in the cosmos. The human observers were celebrating, but not with arrogance or mockery, and instead they showed relief and pride and hope, because this victory meant their people could finally expand beyond their current boundaries. Without constant elven interference, Lady Kelith felt the weight of her defeat pressing down on her, and it was heavier than any physical burden she had ever carried, because she had not just lost a fight, but had lost her certainty about the natural order of things. Maya released her hand and stepped back and said that she hoped this would be the beginning of better relations between their peoples and not the start of greater conflict. Lady Kelith nodded slowly, because she could not find words to express the complex emotions churning inside her. In 3,000 years of accumulated pride and certainty were crumbling, and she did not know what would replace. The Mazurewing moved closer to his bonded partner and pressed his massive head against her side in comfort, and the dragon was also struggling with what had happened, because he too had believed in elven superiority. Without question, the adjudicator formally declared Maya Collins the victor and announced that the disputed Outer Reach territories would be transferred to human control. According to the terms of the challenge, Lady Kelith retrieved what remained of her armor with as much dignity as she could manage, and each piece felt like it weighed more than it should, and not from physical mass, but from the weight of defeat and humiliation. Maya collected her wooden sword and held it carefully, and Lady Kelith noticed that the human did not celebrate or gloat, but simply accepted the victory with quiet professionalism. As Lady Kelith left the arena with Azurewing at her side, she could feel thousands of eyes watching her and judging her, and wondering how the legendary champion of House Wind could have fallen so completely. The walk back to the preparation chambers seemed endless, and each step was difficult, because Lady Kelith had to face the reality that everything she thought she knew about combat and superiority and the natural order had been proven wrong. Inside her mind, questions swirled without answers, and she wondered how many other certainties in her long life were equally false, and how much of what she believed was just comfortable lies that had never been challenged. Dorong spoke into her mind through their bond, said that they had much to think about, and perhaps this defeat, while painful, was also an opportunity to learn and grow in ways they never had before. Lady Keleth wanted to reject that idea because growth implied she had been incomplete before, and that was hard to accept, but deep down, she knew her dragon was right. The galaxy had changed today, and Lady Keleth Moonshadow along with it, and there was no going back to the comfortable certainty of yesterday. The medical ward of the Velshara Arena Complex was beautiful, with walls made of living crystal that pulsed with gentle healing light and herbs from many worlds, releasing therapeutic scents into the air, and healers whose magic could mend even serious wounds within hours. But as Lady Keleth sat on the recovery bench with her ruined armor discarded in a ceremonial waste container, she felt no comfort from the familiar surroundings as Wire lay beside her with his massive head resting on the floor, and the dragon's pride was wounded more deeply than his body because a healer had treated the bruising on his leg joint and wing membrane, but no spell could mend damaged. Digny Lady Keleth murmured to herself that she had trained for 3,000 years and fought in countless battles and won every single one, and yet she lost to a warrior who had lived barely 3 decades. A new voice spoke and said that Lady Keleth had lost to more than just one warrior. Lady Keleth looked up to find Maya standing in the doorway, and now the human wore simple civilian clothes, which were a gray tunic and pants that marked her as distinctly human, and the wooden sword was gone and replaced by nothing, and somehow that made her seem more dangerous instead of less. Lady Keleth asked bitterly if Maya had come to gloat. Maya said no, and approached slowly and respectfully, the way someone might approach a wounded predator, and she asked if she could sit down. Lady Keleth gestured weakly at the bench, and Maya sat down but kept careful distance between them. Maya explained that the sword she carried represented 20 years of research by a team of 300 scientists and engineers and combat specialists, and the null field generators on her armor took 5 years of development across 12 different laboratories, and the techniques she used were drawn from combat data compiled from 10,000 human warriors across 2 centuries of conflict. Maya leaned forward with an earnest expression and said that Lady Keleth did not lose to her, but lost to humanity, meaning all of it working together and learning together and building on each other's innovations. Continued and explained that elves lived for thousands of years, so they perfected individual skills, and each elf became a master unto themselves. But humans only lived maybe 80 years, if they were lucky, and so they did not try to master everything alone, and instead they shared and collaborated, and stood on the shoulders of those who came before them. Lady Keleth's throat felt tight, and she asked if she was defeated by collective mediocrity and wondered if that was supposed to make her feel better. Maya said, not mediocrity, but synergy. And she explained that one human was fragile and short-lived and weak compared to an elf, but humans working together became something greater than the sum of their parts, and every scientist who contributed to that sword, and every engineer who refined the null field, and every soldier who documented combat techniques were all in that arena with Maya. Maya said that Lady Keleth was not fighting one human, but was fighting all of the Mazurwing, raised his head slightly, and his ancient eyes focused on Maya, and when he spoke, his voice resonated through the room like distant thunder. And he said that Maya spoke of unity, that he sensed calculation in her victory, and this duel was meant to humiliate them and break their spirit, and she should not pretend it was merely about territorial rights. Maya met the dragon's gaze without flinching, and she said that Azurewing was right because it was about more than territory, and it was about respect. Maya stood and walked to the window and looked out at the gleaming spires of Velshara, and she said that, for 50 years, elven people had treated humans like children who were dangerous and foolish and needed to be contained, and elves had destroyed human colonies with barely a thought, and killed human explorers as trespassers and laughed at human ambassadors. She turned back to face them and said yes. She was meant to make a statement, and to prove that humanity was not helpless, and to show that elven superiority was assumed and not inherent. And she asked if it was cruel, and said, maybe, but it was necessary. Lady Keleth repeated the word necessary in a flat tone, and asked if it was necessary to shatter her armor in front of thousands of witnesses and humiliate a champion of House Starwind. And she wanted to know what came next, and if humans would demand that elves bow before their flag and tear down their monuments and rewrite their history. To put humanity at the center, Maya's response was immediate and firm, and she said no. And that was the difference between them, because when elven people had the advantage, they used it to dominate and control and enforce. A hierarchy with elves at the top and everyone else scrambling for scraps, Maya walked back to the bench and sat down again, but this time closer, and she said that was not what humans wanted, because they did not want to conquer elves but wanted to work with them and trade with them and learn from them, and yes, eventually they wanted elves too. Learn from humans. To Lady Kelith laughed, and it was a harsh and brittle sound, and she asked what humanity could possibly teach a civilization that mastered the stars. Before human ancestors left the trees, Maya said simply that humans could teach humility and adaptability and the value of diverse perspectives and the strength that comes from cooperation instead of competition. Maya paused, and then said that most importantly, humans could teach that being wrong does not mean being worthless. Words hit Lady Kelith like a physical blow, and her hands clenched into fists, and she started to object about how Maya dared to say such things. Maya interrupted gently and said that Lady Kelith had spent 3,000 years being right about combat and right about magic and right about her place in the galaxy, and now, for maybe the first time in her very long life, she had been proven catastrophically wrong, and that was why this hurt so much, because it was not just the defeat itself, but what it meant about everything she believed. Tears that were hot and shameful burned in Lady Kelith's eyes, but she refused to let them fall, and she said that Maya knew nothing about her. Maya said she knew more than Lady Kelith thought, because before this duel, Maya had read everything available about her, including battle records and personal histories and psychological profiles, compiled by Human Intelligence Services. Maya asked if Lady Kelith wanted to know what she found. Lady Kelith did not answer. Maya said that she found a warrior who had won every fight for 3,000 years and who had never known defeat, and who had been told since childhood that she was superior to nearly every other being in the galaxy. Maya said that she also found a warrior who stopped growing 2,000 years ago, because why would anyone need to grow when they were already perfect? Lady Kelith started to say that she was not perfect, but the words died in her throat. Maya said that Lady Kelith was perfect, or rather she was taught to believe she was, and that belief made her brittle, because perfect things do not bend, and instead they shatter, just like her armor, and just like her certainty. They sat in silence for a long moment, and outside, the twin moons had risen higher and cast silver light through the crystalline outer reach. Territories belonged to humans, and the elven government would honor the duel's terms, but this changed everything, including the balance of power and the treaties and the understanding between their peoples, and it was all uncertain. Namaya nodded and said it was uncertain, and she would not lie, because there were factions in the Human Defense Corps who wanted to use this victory as a launching point for aggressive expansion, and who saw this as proof that they should push harder against elven borders and demand more concessions, and maybe even prepare for eventual conflict. Lady Kelith's head snapped up and warrior instincts flared, and she asked if this was just the opening move in a war. Maya said only if they let it be, and it could also be the beginning of something better, like a partnership or an alliance or a chance for both their peoples to learn from each other instead of fighting each other. Maya stood and extended her hand again and said that she did not want to be Lady Kelith's conqueror, but wanted to be her colleague and her friend eventually, and her equal. Ois Maya said that the wooden sword proved humans could stand against elves, but it did not prove they should, and the next chapter, meaning what came after this duel, was not written yet, and they got to create it together. 6 months later, Lady Kelith stood in the observation deck of the research station called Harmony's Promise, which was a joint facility orbiting a neutral world, and it was built by humans and elves working together for the first time in recorded history, and through the reinforced viewing port, she could see both human and elven vessels docked at the station, and their designs were so different, yet somehow they worked well together. A young human technician named Kate Morrison said that the Neural interface calibration was ready. She had spent the last hour adjusting equipment with careful attention to every detail. Lady Kelleth nodded and tried to hide her nervousness because today marked another first, which was a collaborative experiment where human technology would be merged with elven magic to create something neither civilization could achieve alone, and she was to be the elven representative connecting her natural medical abilities to a human-designed neural interface. That would allow real-time collaboration with human. Researchers Maya entered the room now wearing the insignia of a commander, which was a promotion she received after the duel for advancing human-elven relations through exceptional diplomatic skill, and the irony of calling combat diplomacy was not lost on either of them. Maya asked if Lady Kelleth was nervous. Lady Kelleth admitted that she was terrified because the first time they met she had mocked Maya's wooden sword, and now she was about to let human technology interface directly with her consciousness, and if someone had told her 6 months ago this is where she would be then, she would have thought they were insane. Maya suggested, with a slight smile, that Lady Kelleth would have challenged her to another duel. Lady Kelleth said she would have thought. Maya was mad, but then she thought many things 6 months ago that she no longer believed. The changes in Lady Kelleth went deeper than philosophy because after the duel, she resigned from active military service and requested assignment to the newly formed Joint Research Initiative, and her government had been shocked because champions of her skill level did not simply walk away from combat, but Lady Kelleth had been firm in her decision because she had spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of war, and it was time to learn something new. The learning process had been steep and humbling because human technology operated on principles that seemed almost like magic to elven sensibilities, yet lacked the elegant simplicity of true magic in elven. Magic followed rules that humans found frustratingly intuitive rather than systematic, and the two approaches were like different languages describing the same reality, but slowly and painfully the two sides were learning to communicate. Maya explained that Dr. Patterson said the interface should allow Lady Kelleth to channel her magic through quantum processors, and if successful they might be able to achieve computational speeds impossible with either technology alone. Lady Kelleth asked what would happen if it was unsuccessful. Maya said then they would learn what does not work and try something else, because that was science. Maya's expression became more serious, and she mentioned that there were still factions on both sides who considered this collaboration a betrayal, because some of her superiors thought they were giving away too many technological secrets, and some of the Elven Council members believed Lady Kelleth was dishonoring House Starwind by working with humans. Lady Kelleth said to let them believe what they wished, because she had spent 3,000 years being certain she was right about everything, and now she was done with certainty and wanted to be curious. Instead, Azorwing's voice resonated through her mind, because their bond allowed mental communication across distance, and the dragon had remained on the elven homeworld, but they stayed constantly connected. And he said that Lady Kelleth spoke well, though he admitted he missed the days when she was confidently wrong instead of humbly curious, because she was far less stressful to bond with. Lady Kelleth smiled at the dragon's dry humor, because their relationship had changed too, and Azuring no longer saw himself as her weapon, and she no longer saw him as her tool, and they were partners who were truly equal, and the shift had strengthened their bond greatly. Dara Claire Patterson, who was the Azure lead scientist on the project, entered the room, and she was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes that held brilliant intelligence, and she asked if they should begin. Dr. Patterson said that if Lady Kelleth would take position in the interface chair, they would start the calibration sequence. Lady Kelleth moved to the chair, which was a complex device that looked like a throne designed by people who did not understand furniture, and it had neural sensors and magical resonance detectors and feedback systems that seemed to defy both physics and mysticism, and she sat down trying to project confidence. She did not entirely field. R. Patterson assured her that this would not hurt, though she might experience some sensory confusion. As the systems synchronized with her magical field, Lady Kelleth said she had survived worse, and she was thinking of the duel. The doctor smiled and said that, yes, she had watched the recording and found it quite impressive for both of them, though. From a scientific perspective, the most fascinating part was watching Lady Kelleth's armor enchantments degrade. under harmonic disruption because they learned more about elven magical theory from that 20-minute duel than from 50 years of academic study. Maya coughed in a diplomatic way, and Dr. Patterson looked embarrassed. Doctor asked if that was insensitive because she sometimes forgot the social context and just thought about the data. Lady Kelleth said it was fine and that she could respect scientific curiosity, but she had learned to hate arrogant certainty. Interface activated, and Lady Kelleth felt the neural sensors making contact with her skin and felt the strange tingle of human technology attempting to communicate with her elven nervous system. And then the magical resonance detectors engaged. Suddenly she could sense the vast computational network of the station itself, with thousands of processors working together, and each one following logical pathways. At impossible speed, it was beautiful in an alien way. Dr. Patterson instructed Lady Kelleth to try channeling a simple spell through the interface, and nothing complex but perhaps a basic light charm. Lady Kelleth focused and drew on the magic that was as natural to her as breathing, and she shaped it into the familiar pattern of light, but instead of releasing it into the physical world, she directed it into the interface. The room exploded with light, but not the gentle glow she intended, and instead, brilliant cascading patterns danced across every surface. Because the computers had taken her magical input and amplified it and processed it and transformed it into something more. Patterson exclaimed that this was fascinating because the quantum processors were using Lady Kelleth's magical energy to access computational states they could not reach through technological means alone, and this was unprecedented. Over the next hour they ran test after test, and each one revealed new possibilities, including magic that could be precisely measured and replicated by technology, and technology that could be enhanced and directed by magical intuition, and human and elf and machine and magic, all working in harmony. During a break in testing, Maya joined Lady Kelleth by the observation window. Again, Maya observed that Lady Kelleth was smiling and said it was the first time she had seen that. Lady Kelleth admitted it was the first time she had reason to smile in several centuries, and she asked Maya if she knew what the worst part of immortality was. Lady Kelleth said it was not watching mortals age and die. Oh, that was painful enough, but it was the certainty that came from living so long, because after a few thousand years you thought you had seen everything and learned everything and become everything you would ever be. She gestured at the interface chair and at the human and elven scientists collaborating in the background, said that this was new and genuinely, wonderfully new, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not know what came next, and instead of terrifying her, it was exhilarating. Maya nodded slowly and said she thought she understood because humans lived such short lives. That novelty was constant for them, and they barely mastered one skill before they had to move on to the next. But for elves with thousands of years to perfect themselves, reaching their limit must be like hitting a wall they could not climb. Lady Kelleth said exactly, and she explained that her people had been stagnant for 10,000 years because they perfected their magic and their art and their culture, and then they simply maintained it and became curators of their own museum, polishing old achievements instead of creating new ones. Maya asked what came now. Lady Kelleth said now they had the chance to grow again and to learn from beings who thought differently and lived differently and saw the universe differently. Lady Kelleth said that Maya had asked her 6 months ago what humanity could teach a civilization that mastered the stars before human ancestors left the trees, and she thought it was meant as an insult. But she had learned the answer. Maya asked what the answer was. Lady Kelleth said that humans could teach elves to be beginners again because every human was a beginner since they had to be with such short lives, but they had turned that weakness into strength, and they were not afraid to try new things and to fail, and to learn from failure and try again, and they had built an entire civilization on the principle that being a beginner was not shameful, but essential.